Hello, math students. Welcome back to Module 2 called Rational Numbers. This is Lesson 9, and Lesson 9 is called Applying the Properties of Operations to Multiply and Divide Rational Numbers. Our goal for today we will use the properties of operations to multiply and divide rational numbers. The question that I want you to think about during this lesson is, how can using the properties help you to multiply and divide rational numbers? Okay, so properties of operations are basically the commutative, the associative, the distributive, the identity property of addition, the identity property of multiplication, and properties are a good way to remember specific rules and things that you can do to manipulate numbers to make them easier. So, things to know. The properties are helpful when multiplying and dividing rational numbers because we can rearrange the terms to combine them more easily. The ones that we're going to focus on this lesson are actually not new. You've been hearing about them because I've been telling you about them. You've actually been learning about them for several years. And so now we're going to take that information that we've been learning and we're going to apply it to multiplying and dividing rational numbers. The commutative property is the property in multiplication that allows you to change the order. So commutative property is the property that lets you change the order. Okay, it lets you change the order of the operations. Okay, and so this property allows you to change the order that you multiply. So the first problem that we're going to look at is this one right here. And the problem originally is written as -2 times 3/8 times 4 times 5/7. And for me, one of the things that I think looking at this is that if I use the commutative property, then what I can do is I can change the order in which we multiply these specific factors so that it makes it easier. So this little arrow right here is telling you that I'm changing the order. And the order that I want to change it to is I would like to multiply the fractions by each other, and then I would like to multiply the integers by each other, and then when I'm done doing that, I'll multiply both of those together. One of the things that I know about multiplying fractions is that all you have to do is multiply straight across. So I'm going to move this over here so we can focus on it. 3/8 times 5/7 gives me, multiply straight across, 15/56. Okay, so that's that one. And now I'm going to focus on this, but first I'm going to put a big old multiplication symbol so that I remember that I have to multiply this times whatever the answer is over here. Now I'm going to combine these guys, and I'm going to take, 2 times 4 is 8, and then I remember my rules of a negative times a positive has to be a negative because the signs are different. So 2 times 4 is 8, and negative times a positive is a negative, so I'm going to multiply this fraction by -8/1, because when you take a fraction by a whole number, you have to change the whole number into a fraction, and then you multiply straight across. So again, now I can multiply these two straight across, and I know 56 times 1 is 56, and I'm going to take 15 times 8. Well, 8 times 5 is 40. Regroup the 4. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 4 is 12. And I did a positive times a negative, which is different sign, so I know my answer has to be negative. And then I'm left with 120/56, which I know can simplify by 2. And if I take 2 into 120, I get -60. And if I take 2 into 56, then I know it goes 20 with 1 left over. So now I'm down to -60/28, and I can take 2 out of there again. So let me move it down here. -60/28 can be simplified again by 2, and 2 goes into -60, -30 times, and 2 goes into 28 14 times. So I can simplify it again, and I get -30 divided by 2 is -15, and I take 14 divided by 2, and I get 7. And so this right here would be the final answer for this problem right here. So negative 2 times 3/8 times 4 times 5/7 gives me an answer of negative 15/7 when I'm all done. And that wasn't so bad, okay? All right, so that's the commutative property, which makes it a lot easier than just multiplying it the way it looks, because it looks a little bit scarier when it's like that. All right, multiplicative inverse. Now we're talking about the next property. Multiplicative inverse means that you're multiplying by the opposite. So this property says that dividing numbers is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal, which is exactly true. So if we remember that dividing numbers is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal, then we can change this problem right here to be a little bit easier. And so this first section of the problem, we have 6 divided by 2/3 times negative 8 times 3 divided by a negative 1/2. Okay, and if you're remembering how order of operations works, you do multiplying and dividing at the same time, but you work left to right. So we start here and we go this way. So when you're using the multiplicative inverse, the division actually can be multiplying by the reciprocal. So the first thing that I would like to change is I'm going to focus on this one. And instead of having 6 divided by 2/3, I remember that division is opposite of multiplication. So I'm going to put multiply, and I'm going to do the reciprocal of 2/3, which is 3/2. And then I have 6, because that's what I have. Remember, this is what I have. This is what I'm multiplying by the reciprocal by. And then I have to take that and times it by negative 8 over 1, right? Times 3 over 1 times multiply by the reciprocal, so I get negative 2 over 1. Okay? So now that I have got rid of those guys, because I remember that I can multiply by the reciprocal, now all I have to do is multiply straight across, and that's not too difficult. So 6 times 3 is 18. So this group right here is 18, right? Now I have to take 18 times the negative 8. So let's do some math over here. 18 times negative 8. 8 times 8 is 64. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 6 is 14. So now I know that these two combined is going to be negative 144. However, I did a positive times a negative, so I know this answer has to be a negative 144. And now I'm taking 144 times 3. And it's a negative, because a negative times a positive is a negative. So negative 144 times 3. 3 times 4 is 12. 3 times 4 is 12 plus 1 is 13. 3 times 1 is 3 plus 1 is 4. So now these two combined gives me an answer of negative 432, right? And then I have to multiply it by a negative 2. So I have a negative times a negative gives me a positive, and I end up with negative 432 times negative 2. I get 4, 6, and 8, and we know that the negative times a negative is a positive. So this all equals 864 divided by 1 times 2 is 2, times 1 is 2, times 1 is 2, times 1 is 2, and that's what I get. And so then what I can do with all of that is I can take a look at it and know that 864 divided by 2 equals 2 goes into 8 4 times, 2 goes into 6 3 times, and 2 goes into 4 2 times. So the answer to this big old long thing is 432. And the reason that I was able to do that very easily is because dividing is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So I divided by 2/3 over here, I multiplied by 3/2. I divided by a negative 1/2 over here, I multiplied by a negative 2 over 1. And so I did exactly the process of division is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. And that's the multiplicative inverse. So it makes it very simple. Okay? Not too bad. All right, the last one that we're going to talk about today is the distributive property. And the distributive property is the property that has you take an amount and spread it to other terms that are available. And so this property requires you to multiply a given amount by all the other given terms. So in this example, we have 16 here. And so what this is telling us that we have to do is we have to take 16 and we have to multiply it by this term. Then we have to take 16 and we have to multiply it by this term. Then we have to take 3 and we have to multiply it by this term. And we have to take 3 and we have to multiply it by this term. So if we write it all out, we're going to take this term right here, which is negative 3/8. So we're going to take 16 over 1 times negative 3 over 8 plus 16 over 1 times 1 over 4 plus 3 over 1 times 9 over 12 plus 3 over 1 times negative 5 over 15. And that's how you spread it all the way out so that you can do the math, okay? Noticing that this right here is multiply, 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 and then when we're all done multiplying, we add them together. So 16 times 3 is 18, regroup the 1 is 4. A positive times a negative is a negative, and then 1 times 8 is 8, so I have negative 48/8 here. Then it says plus. 16 times 1 is 16. 1 times 4 is 4. So there's that one. Then it says plus. 3 times 9 is 27. 1 times 12 is 12. And then I have plus. 3 times a negative 5 is negative 15 because a positive times a negative is a negative. And 1 times 15 is 15. Okay? So now we're almost done because we can simplify it. A negative divided by a positive is a negative. 48 divided by 8 is negative 6. Plus 16 divided by 4 is 4. Plus 27 divided by 12, I'm just going to leave that as 27/12 for a minute. Plus negative 15 divided by 15 is a negative 1. Okay, so does everybody see what we're doing? We're slowly getting this resolved, and unfortunately I'm falling out of paper, so I'm going to move over here and I'm going to change colors so you can watch what I'm doing. So negative 6 plus 4 is actually, I have 6 negatives and 4 positives, so that would give me 2 negatives left over and then another negative to add to it, so I actually have negative 3 plus 27/12. Okay, and 27/12 actually can be broken into 12 goes into 27 2 full times, which is 24. 27 minus 24 is 3/12, right? So now I have 2 and 3/12, which is actually equal to 2 and 1/4. And now I have 2 and 1/4, which is positive, and negative 3, which is negative. And so what I would like to do is let's draw it on the number line so we can figure out our final answer. So we have negative 3, so we start at 0 and we go 1, 2, 3. Here's negative 3, and then it says I'm adding 2 and 1/4. So I go 1, 2, so that's at negative 1, and then a fourth would be right here. And so where I'm actually sitting is still in the negatives, but it's at negative 3/4. So my answer to this whole long problem, based on all of the math that we did with simplifying, you get an answer of negative 3/4. Okay? So the distributive property, once again, allows us to take an amount and distribute it to each term, plus take the amount, distribute it to each term, and after you do all of that work, you end up with this little number right here, which is negative 3/4. Okay? So going back to our goal for today, we will use the properties of operations to multiply and divide rational numbers, which is what we did. The question, how can using the properties help you to multiply and divide rational numbers? I would say that the reason why it helps you or how it helps you is that it makes the actual problems that you're working with easier. Okay? And we will do lots of practice in class so that you can practice working with the commutative property, the multiplicative inverse property, and the distributive property. Okay? All right, kiddos, that's all I have for you in this lesson. I'll talk to you soon. Bye!